Leave before you ruin this night!
The board just paused your $20 million deal.
Natalie, he's the final signer.
You were removed from the guest list. The security officer said it without hostility, which made it worse. His tablet rested against one palm while the doors to Crown Hall opened and closed behind him. Inside, the Queen City Hospitality Gala was underway. I could hear conversation, the clink of glassware, the practiced laughter of people who knew which names mattered in a room like that. My wife's company had planned every detail, the floral walls, the stage lighting, the seating chart. Apparently, it had also planned for me. "There should be a note," I said. He glanced down. His expression changed enough for me to notice. "Sir, I'm only following the instructions provided. Read them." He hesitated. A second officer stood several feet away, watching my hands instead of my face. I kept both at my sides. The first officer turned the tablet toward me. Black male, early 40s, estranged spouse. May become confrontational if denied access. I read it twice. Not because the words were unclear, because I wanted to feel what they had decided before I arrived. "What did I do to earn that description?" I asked. The officer's thumb shifted along the tablet. "I can't speak to that. This came from Whitmore Heritage Events." Of course it had. My name was gone, but my race, age, and presumed behavior had been preserved with care. I did not argue. I reached inside my jacket slowly and removed the invitation issued by Crescent Meridian's governance office. The officer examined it, called the hotel's general manager, then stepped aside after a conversation. "You may enter," he said. The second officer followed me anyway. Crown Hall looked exactly the way Natalie liked her success to look. White orchids, silver table settings, a stage framed by glass panels carrying the Whitmore Heritage Events logo. She stood in a blue gown, one hand resting at Grant Hollis's elbow as he spoke to investors. He saw me first. His mouth stopped moving. Natalie turned, and for 1 second I saw fear before anger covered it. She crossed the room quickly. "You need to leave." No greeting. No question about how I had entered. Grant remained behind her, close enough to suggest loyalty, far enough to avoid the scene. I did not ask why my clothes had been boxed, why the locks had changed, or why her advisor now stood where her husband once had. Those questions had answers I no longer needed. "Natalie," I said, "did you tell the bank that the signature on the loan was mine?" Her jaw tightened. "This is not the place." "Yes or no? That loan is the only reason the company is still operating. You know what is at stake, and you are trying to destroy it over paperwork. Paperwork. My tax records, my social security number, my home address, a signature shaped to resemble mine closely enough to carry debt, but not closely enough to survive attention." Vivian arrived before I could answer. She wore ivory, and the expression of someone entering a conversation she believed she controlled. "West End helped us earn the city's trust," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Tonight is about investors." She did not need to say the rest. My work was useful when they needed photographs, neighborhood access, and the approval of black business leaders. I was less useful when the room contained money. Several guests looked away. Natalie noticed them looking, and embarrassment sharpened her face. "Answer me once," I said. "Did you tell the bank I signed it?" A server passed with a tray of red wine. Natalie reached for a glass. I thought she needed something to steady her hand. Instead, she threw it into my chest. The wine spread across my shirt and collar, cold at first, then warm against my skin. The room fell silent. I did not move. Vivian turned toward security. "He is making everyone uncomfortable. Remove him." The two officers started forward. Then a voice came from beside the stage, calm and carrying farther than Vivian's accusation. "Marcus James Ellison." Calvin Price stepped into the aisle. Every face in Crown Hall turned toward him, then toward me. 7 years earlier, Natalie Whitmore had laughed at the paint on my wrist. We met at a fundraiser inside a brick warehouse our coalition restored. I had come straight from a work site. There was dust on my shoes, a line of white paint near my cuff, and enough exhaustion in my face that I had planned to leave after one drink. Natalie stood beneath temporary lights, listening to a donor explain the building's history. When she noticed me, she smiled. "You look like someone who actually helped put this place back together," she said. I told her I had only managed the cruise. She looked at the repaired windows, then back at me. Still counts. I like a man who can point to a building and say he made it useful again. For a long time, I believed that sentence told me everything I needed to know about her. We married 20 months later. The early years did not feel like a performance. Natalie came to neighborhood meetings, sat through discussions about permits, and remembered the names of people most executives forgot before leaving. She brought clients to West End projects and spoke about my work with pride. When Whitmore Heritage Events bid on city contracts, she asked which local vendors had earned the community's trust. I introduced her carefully, believing access should follow character. Her company won work. Our coalition gained sponsors. It seemed like partnership. Then Natalie became CEO. Nothing changed overnight. Instead, small moments began collecting around us. At a hotel reception, I noticed a sponsor struggling with a crooked name board, so I helped straighten it. He thanked me, then asked whether the installation crew needed anything else. Natalie heard him. She paused, looked at my jacket, and moved the conversation toward the program without correcting him. In the car, I asked why. She stared through the windshield before answering. I didn't want to turn a small misunderstanding into an argument in front of a client. I told her correction was not an argument. She said I was making the evening heavier than it needed to be. A few months later, Whitmore Heritage released its annual report. The cover showed a restored row of brick storefronts from one of our West End projects. I remembered the original photograph because I had been standing near the left edge beside two contractors. In the printed version, the frame ended at my shoulder. Natalie said the design team wanted a cleaner image with a stronger architectural focus. She said it casually, but she watched my face. I let the explanation pass because marriage can make patience feel like loyalty. Grant Hollis arrived that spring. Vivian hired him to position the company for a $20 million hospitality contract with Crescent Meridian Holdings. Crescent Meridian's ownership sat behind private family trusts and holding companies, and my father had never served as its public face. Natalie knew I held interests in family trusts, but she had never asked what those trusts controlled. Grant never insulted me directly. He preferred language that left no fingerprints. Investors needed stability. Luxury brands depended on familiarity. A chief executive's personal life should reassure clients, not raise questions. Natalie repeated his phrases at dinner as if they were facts instead of judgments. One evening, I returned to her office with a folder she had left at home. The conference room door was open. Grant's voice carried into the hallway. He said my community work gave Natalie a strong story, but my presence at investor meetings made that story harder to control. Natalie did not defend me. She said she understood the concern. I stood there with the folder in my hand, feeling something inside the marriage shift by a degree too small to measure and too real to ignore. I left it with her assistant and went home. I did not confront Natalie. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself she would hear what Grant was turning her into and step back. I was still telling myself that months later when a loan officer called my office. She confirmed my name and said the bank had released an initial draw on a $520,000 business credit line. But the remaining funds required my original signature and formal verification of the collateral. I asked whose signature was already on file. There was a pause. "Yours, Mr. Ellison." I looked down at my hand beside the phone. I had never agreed to that loan. The next morning, I went to Queen City Federal before work. I did not call Natalie first. I wanted the documents before another explanation could reshape them. The loan officer led me into a small office and placed a folder on the table. Whitmore Heritage Events had opened a $520,000 business credit line and already taken an initial draw. My name appeared beneath Natalie's as a personal co-guarantor. My Social Security number was there. So were 2 years of tax returns, a copy of my driver's license, and the address of the house held by Ashford Ridge Trust. A declaration stated that I had voluntarily offered the property as collateral. I read that line twice. The house could not legally be pledged by either of us, but whoever prepared the file had assumed no one would check. The electronic signature looked close enough to mine to pass at a glance. The mistake was in the name, Marcus James Ellison. I never used James on legal documents. My father had insisted on my first and last name only, and I had kept that habit into adulthood. Natalie used James on insurance forms, reservations, and household paperwork. She thought of it as my full name. The bank treated it as proof. I requested copies of the application history and disbursement record. The loan officer asked whether I wanted to file a fraud report immediately. I told her I needed the complete file first. Her eyes stayed on me, waiting for anger. What she got was a question. Who submitted the final package? She checked the system. The authorized contact was Natalie Ellison. That evening, Natalie came home after 9. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the documents arranged in order. She stopped when she saw them. Her face changed, not with surprise but recognition. "You went to the bank." "I did." She set down her handbag. "Marcus, before you make this into something it isn't, the company had no choice." I slid the signature page toward her. "Did you submit this?" She looked at it, then at me. "We needed working capital before the Gala. Once the Crescent Meridian contract closes, the loan gets repaid." That was not my question. Her shoulders tightened. "You were never going to be harmed by it. You used my identity. We are married," she said it, as if marriage settled ownership, as if trust were a blank form she could complete for me. I kept my voice low. Marriage lets two people build together. It does not let one person replace the other's signature. Natalie looked toward the window. "You do not understand what is at stake. Then explain why $70,000 went to Grant's company." She turned back too quickly. A break in her control. Before she answered, headlights crossed the front windows. Vivian arrived less than 10 minutes later. She entered without removing her coat. She looked at the papers, then at me, and showed irritation rather than concern. "This company has carried the Whitmore name for 24 years, she said. "You have benefited from that name since the day you married Natalie." My signature was forged. Vivian ignored the word. "You spend every day asking businesses to invest in West End. But when your wife's company needs support, suddenly you stand outside the problem and talk about process." "The process is consent. The process is survival," Natalie said. Vivian nodded as though that settled it. That was when I understood they did not believe they had crossed a line. They believed I had. In their minds, my role was to be grateful, quiet, and useful. I was supposed to accept the debt because they had decided I lacked the money, access, and influence to challenge it. I gathered the copies and went to my study. The $70,000 transfer to Hollis Strategic Partners had cleared 3 days after the initial draw was funded. The description read Strategic Advisory Retainer. No invoice was attached, no report, no scope of work, just the transfer. I stared at Grant's company name until it stopped looking like a name and started looking like a door. I still did not know what was behind it, but I knew I was going to open it. I called Renee Lawson before sunrise. She had handled my family's legal affairs for 12 years and listened without interrupting until the part that mattered revealed itself. I told her about the loan, the signature, the house, and the transfer to Hollis Strategic Partners. When I finished, she asked, "Do you want answers or revenge?" "Answers. Good. Revenge makes people careless." By the end of the day, my credit file was frozen, the loan was under formal dispute, and every institution involved had orders to preserve emails, access logs, and some submission records. Renee also notified Queen City Federal that Ashford Ridge Trust owned the house and had never authorized it as collateral. No additional money could be released against it. The bank sent us the first disbursement report the next morning. $70,000 had gone to Grant's firm. Another payment covered the deposit on an apartment leased in Natalie's name. A resort outside Asheville had charged the account for a 2-guest stay. A watch had been shipped to Grant's office. Several consulting payments appeared without invoices or reports. Renee read the list without changing her expression. "Do not decide what this means yet," she said. "Trace where the money ends." I agreed. I was not ready to name the relationship between Natalie and Grant. Suspicion could wait. Records could not. 2 days later, Simone Carter called my office. She managed production for Whitmore Heritage Events and had worked with West End Renewal Coalition the year before. "I heard finance talking about your dispute," she said. "There is something you need to see." We met in a conference room at Renee's office. Simone brought a printed spreadsheet inside an envelope. She placed it on the table but kept one hand over it. Before I give you this, I need protection in writing. I cannot lose my job because I told the truth. Renee answered first. If the file supports what you are saying, we will document your cooperation and issue a preservation notice. No one will use your name without your consent unless the law requires it. Simone looked at me. I told her that was my condition as well. Only then did she move her hand. The spreadsheet ranked vendors under 3 headings: protected, standard, and low escalation risk. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then Simone explained how it worked. Protected vendors had attorneys, major clients, or hotel relationships. Standard vendors could wait briefly. Low escalation risk vendors were paid last whenever cash short. Most of the names in that third group belonged to Black-owned catering companies, floral studios, transportation services, and staging crews. They think these businesses need Whitmore too much to complain, Simone said. They assume no lawyer will call and no reporter will care. Renee turned to the final page. Attached was a short email from Vivian. If we need to hold cash another cycle, start with the vendors least likely to escalate. The email never mentioned race. It did not need to. The pattern did the speaking. The company had converted limited access to lawyers, capital, and media into a cash flow strategy. The same belief behind my forged signature sat inside that spreadsheet. Choose the people least likely to fight back. Simone then showed us payroll notices. Several employees were waiting on late wages. Client deposits marked for future events had been moved into operating accounts to cover older obligations. The clients had not been told. I had begun the week believing I was investigating what my wife had done to me. By the end of that meeting, I understood the damage had spread across people whose names would never appear on the Gala program. I called Calvin Price from Renee's conference room after Simone left. Calvin had served as acting chief executive of Crescent Meridian Holdings since my father's death, managing the company while the trustees completed the transfer of voting authority to me. He answered on the second ring. Marcus, I heard there may be a problem involving Whitmore Heritage. There is? I need 2 things from you. He waited. Calvin knew I did not call him to think aloud. Do not tell anyone at Whitmore who I am. Continue reviewing their proposal exactly as you would have yesterday. No favors, no penalties. Even after what Natalie did? Especially after what she did. He was silent for a moment. Understood. Crescent Meridian's audit team had already been examining Whitmore Heritage events for the $20 million hospitality contract. Calvin sent me the preliminary report that evening. I read it alone in my office at West End Renewal Coalition, with the building quiet around me and the city lights reflecting against the windows. Grant had told Natalie and Vivian that his contacts had placed their company near the top of the list. According to the report, that was fiction. Whitmore Heritage had never been the leading candidate. Its application had moved into the high-risk category weeks earlier because of unstable cash flow. Client deposits used to cover older obligations, delayed payroll, selective vendor payments, and large transfers to a consulting company with no documented work. The concern about unauthorized use of personal information was added after my loan dispute reached the bank. Crescent Meridian's review committee was considering 2 options. It could reject the proposal and close the file, or it could offer a conditional management agreement that would place the company's finances under outside control while protecting the events already booked. Once my voting authority transferred, I could block either choice. For several minutes, rejection felt clean. Natalie had forged my signature, Vivian had defended her, and Grant had taken the money. Then I reached the staffing section. 46 employees depended on Whitmore Heritage for regular income. 30 vendors were waiting for payment. Several clients had placed deposits for events scheduled over the next 6 months. They had not forged my signature. They had not moved money into Grant's company, or ranked Black-owned businesses by how unlikely they were to complain. They had shown up, completed their work, and trusted the people above them to do the same. If I rejected everything and walked away, Natalie, Vivian, and Grant would lose the company. So would people whose only mistake had been believing their employer's polished reports. I called Calvin back. Prepare the conditional option. With what terms? Anyone connected to the disputed and transactions loses financial control during the review. Client deposits move into protected accounts. Back wages get paid before executive fees. Every vendor receives a written schedule based on contract dates, not on how likely management thinks they are to fight back. Calvin was writing now. I could hear his pen against paper. Anything else? All questionable transactions go to the proper authorities. No private settlement that hides the records. Natalie, Vivian, and Grant receive no benefit from the rescue funds. Calvin paused. You know people will say you saved the company because Natalie is your wife. Then document every reason she cannot control it. And if the numbers do not support a rescue, we close it responsibly. We do not move losses onto employees and small businesses to protect the people who caused them. Calvin exhaled slowly. Your father would have approved. I looked at the report again. My father is not the one who has to live with the decision. Before ending the call, I said what had been forming in my mind since Simone placed the vendor list on Renee's table. I do not want to prove I am powerful by putting innocent people out of work. The next morning, Queen City Federal formally notified Whitmore Heritage Events that I denied signing the loan documents. Natalie called while I was reviewing a housing budget with my staff. I stepped into the hallway and answered. She did not ask what the bank had shown me. She did not ask whether the signature could be corrected or the money returned. You are destroying my future, she said. Her voice shook beneath the anger. You have always resented what I was becoming. I looked through the glass wall at my coworkers continuing the meeting without me. I disputed a signature that was not mine. You know this company cannot survive without that loan. Then the company was already in trouble before I found it. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing, controlled and uneven. Withdraw the dispute, Marcus. No, the word was calm. That seemed to frighten her more than shouting would have. The preserved messages later showed that Grant understood something Natalie had not yet learned. Once the facts became dangerous, the first person to define the story gained an advantage. He urged her not to wait for the bank, the vendors, or anyone inside Whitmore Heritage Events to speak. 2 mornings after I refused to withdraw the dispute, Renee called and asked whether I was sitting down. Natalie had filed for divorce. The petition did more than end the marriage. It described me as increasingly frightening, unpredictable, and emotionally unstable since she began working closely with Grant. I read every page twice. There were no threatening messages attached because none existed. No police reports. No witnesses describing raised voices or aggressive behavior. Her evidence was my refusal to accept a forged signature and my decision to involve a lawyer. She had turned the word no into proof that I might be dangerous. Renee watched me from across her desk. Do not answer this emotionally, she said. I am not emotional. You are. You are simply trained not to show it. She was right. The pain did not feel like anger. It felt colder, like finding out someone had spent years studying your restraint only to use it against you. Vivian appeared on a Charlotte business program the following evening. The host introduced her as a respected founder, defending her daughter from a bitter personal campaign. The screen showed a photograph of me wearing a faded work jacket at a West End renovation site. Grant appeared in a polished corporate portrait beneath the title Strategic Growth Advisor. Vivian said I had become jealous of Natalie's success and was trying to damage a company led by a woman who had outgrown him. She mentioned neither the loan nor the records behind it. Feelings required no documents. The segment spread quickly. By noon the next day, one of West End Renewal Coalition's largest donors paused a $200,000 commitment. His message said he respected our work but could not risk association with a public marital dispute. I stared at the email longer than I had stared at the divorce petition. Natalie's story was no longer hurting only me. It was reaching contractors, staff members, and neighborhoods that had never met Grant Hollis and had no part in Whitmore Heritage's debt. Renee continued tracing the money. The apartment deposit was for a lease Natalie planned to begin after the gala. The resort reservation listed 2 guests, Natalie Ellison and Grant Hollis. The watch had been purchased with money drawn from the loan and delivered to Grant's office. Then Renee found the message that removed the last uncertainty. Grant had written, "Once the Crescent deal closes, Marcus will not have the resources to keep fighting." Natalie replied, "I just need him quiet until then." I expected the confirmation to break something open inside me. Instead, it closed a door. 3 days before the gala, I returned home after work and found 6 storage boxes lined across the front porch. My coats, shoes, books, and personal files had been packed with careful efficiency. My key no longer worked. I stood beneath the porch light with one hand still on the lock. Through the window, the rooms looked unchanged. The lamp beside the sofa was on. A framed photograph from our wedding still sat on the shelf. Natalie had removed me from the house without removing the evidence that I had lived there. I did not knock. I photographed the lock, the boxes, and the front door, then called Renee. "Leave everything where it is until I arrange collection," she said. "Do not give anyone a scene they can describe later." Before I drove away, she sent another document. Natalie's office had removed my name from the Queen City Hospitality Gala and issued a security note. Black male, early 40s, estranged spouse, may become confrontational. The note had been created before I had said I would attend. They were not reporting conduct. They were preparing a meaning for whatever I might do. Silence would look suspicious. Questions would become confrontation. Simply arriving would confirm the warning they had written in advance. That night, Calvin sent formal notice that the trustees had approved the transfer and that it would become legally effective at 5 on the afternoon of the gala. Calvin would announce it that evening. I could have stayed away and handled everything from a boardroom the next morning. Instead, I confirmed my attendance. I was not going to ask Natalie to reconsider the marriage. That part was finished. I was going because employees were owed wages, vendors were waiting for payment, and clients had trusted a company whose leaders were hiding the truth. I would not let innocent people be buried beneath a fraud built by 3 people who believed I could be erased before I had the chance to speak. The wine had reached the edge of my collar when the first phone rose from a table near the aisle. Then another. No one announced that they were recording. They simply stopped pretending the scene was private. Simone stood near the production station beside the stage, one hand still holding her event tablet. She had watched Natalie throw the wine. She had watched me remain where I was, arms at my sides, voice level. Now she watched 2 security officers approach as though calm itself had become suspicious. Natalie looked at them, then at me. "You were asked to leave," she said. Her voice carried across the silence. "Do not force them to remove you in front of everyone." The sentence had been built for the room, not for me. It gave the guests a reason to believe whatever happened next had been my choice. I turned toward the nearest officer. "What behavior am I being removed for?" He glanced at Vivian, then toward the hotel manager standing near the doors. "The event host has requested that you leave, sir." That tells me who made the request. It does not tell me what I did. He had no answer ready. His hand hovered near his radio without touching it. The second officer shifted his stance. I could feel the room waiting for me to provide the reaction they had been warned about. Anger would complete the report. A raised hand would become a threat. One step toward Natalie would explain the note prepared before I arrived. I gave them nothing they could use. Marcus James Ellison. Calvin Price's voice came from the stage. It was not loud, but the room had become quiet enough for every syllable to carry. He stepped past the podium and raised one hand toward security. "No one removes Mr. Ellison." The general manager of the Hawthorne Grand touched his earpiece. Someone spoke to him through the radio. His face tightened, and he walked quickly toward the officers. "Stand down," he said. "Mr. Ellison is an authorized representative of Crescent Meridian's controlling group." The officers moved back. Natalie looked from the manager to Calvin, trying to understand what authority had just crossed the room without asking her permission. Vivian's expression remained composed, but one hand closed around the edge of a chair. Calvin returned to the podium. The presentation screen behind him still displayed the Whitmore Heritage Events logo and the words "A New Era in Southern Hospitality." He looked toward the technical booth. The image disappeared. The formal transfer of controlling voting authority within Crescent Meridian Holdings was completed this evening, he said. A murmur passed through the tables. Effective immediately, Marcus Ellison is the controlling beneficiary and incoming executive chairman of Crescent Meridian Holdings. For a few seconds, no one reacted. Then 2 board members stood, and recognition spread through the room as the man they had dismissed became impossible to ignore. Grant stepped away from Natalie so quickly that the space between them became visible before anyone understood why. He adjusted his jacket and turned slightly toward the stage, presenting himself as an advisor who had merely happened to be standing beside her. Natalie saw the movement. Something in her face gave way. Vivian stared at the signet ring on my right hand. Its crescent and compass emblem appeared on every confidential governance document she had studied for months. She had seen the same symbol at family dinners without connecting it to me because she had already decided who I was. Calvin continued. Whitmore Heritage scheduled an announcement tonight without final authorization from Crescent Meridian. No $20 million agreement has been approved, and the company's proposal is now under special review for its financial controls, vendor obligations, and representations made during the application process. Vivian sat down slowly. Natalie remained standing with the empty wine glass still in her hand. I walked toward the stage. The wet fabric pulled against my shirt with every step. No one laughed now. No one asked security to watch my hands. Calvin moved aside and offered me the microphone. I looked across the room at the investors, hotel executives, vendors, and employees who had just learned a title they believed changed everything. A title can make a room stop and listen, I said, but a title is not the reason any person deserves fair treatment. I returned the microphone without mentioning the affair, the forged loan, or Vivian's accusations. Public humiliation had brought us here. More of it would not repair anything. Renee was waiting beside the stage with a leather file in her hand. I looked at Natalie, then Vivian, then Grant. The 3 of you will come with us to the private conference room. Grant opened his mouth. Renee answered before he could speak. This is no longer a conversation you control. The conference room sat 1 floor above Crown Hall, far enough from the music that every sound inside it felt exposed. Renee placed her leather file at the center of the table. Natalie sat across from me with wine drying on her hand. Vivian remained beside her. Grant chose the chair closest to the door. Renee opened the first folder. We will proceed in order. She placed a cloud access report in front of Natalie. It showed the date, time, device, and account used to download my tax returns. Natalie's device. Nata login. Next came the $520,000 loan application bearing a signature that used the middle name I never used legally. Then the collateral statement naming the Ashford Ridge Trust property as though Natalie had authority over it. No one spoke. Renee added the disbursement ledger. $70,000 to Hollis Strategic Partners. A deposit on an apartment leased by Natalie. A resort booking for 2 guests. A watch delivered to Grant's office. Those were authorized business expenses, Grant said. Renee looked at him. Then identify the business purpose and provide the missing work. She placed printed messages on the table. In one, Grant told Natalie where to find an old electronic signature sample in a shared insurance folder. In another, he advised her to submit the application before the bank requested original verification. Grant's face lost color. I gave technical guidance. She made the decision. Natalie turned toward him. You said the contract was certain. You took the money. You told me Marcus could not afford to fight. I never told you to forge anything. You sent the signature file. Vivian struck the table once. Both of you let a personal relationship endanger this company. Natalie stared at her. You approved the loan, Renee continued. She laid down the vendor ranking sheet, followed by Vivian's email directing finance to delay payments to businesses labeled low escalation risk. Then came the security note prepared before I confirmed my attendance. Blackmail early 40s, estranged spouse, may become confrontational. The final page was an email from Vivian to Natalie. Marcus does not have the resources to drag this out. If he appears, do not debate the loan. Say he is making you feel unsafe. The room changed. They had not waited to observe my behavior. They had decided what my behavior would mean. The email never mentioned race. It did not have to. Beside the security description, the worksite photograph used on television, and every claim based on fear rather than conduct, the intention was clear. Grant spoke first. Natalie controlled the files. Vivian controlled finance. I was an outside advisor. Natalie gave a dry laugh. An advisor who accepted $70,000 and told me when to file for divorce. Vivian looked at her daughter. You endangered 24 years of work for him. 3 people who had acted as one while they believed I was powerless now searched for the safest place to stand. Natalie turned to me. Her anger had weakened, leaving something more fragile beneath it. You hid who you were. The trust interests were listed in our prenuptial agreement. You had your own attorney. It never said you controlled Crescent Meridian. You never asked. You assumed there was nothing worth asking about. Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed hard. Everything would have been different if I had known. I looked at the documents between us. You did not need to know what company I owned to know that signature was not yours to use. You did not need my title to correct the man who mistook me for hotel staff. Natalie looked away. I stood. What changed tonight was not my value, only your ability to keep denying it. By 9 the next morning, Queen City Federal had suspended every remaining draw connected to the loan and demanded an emergency management plan from Whitmore Heritage Events. The bank did not care about the scene at the gala. It cared about collateral that could not legally be pledged, financial statements that no longer matched the company's records, and a signature under formal dispute. Without outside intervention, payroll would fail before the end of the month. Crescent Meridian did not purchase the company. That would have been too fast, too convenient, and too likely to hide the decisions that caused the crisis. Calvin presented Whitmore Heritage's board and Queen City Federal with a temporary support agreement designed to keep scheduled events operating while an independent restructuring firm controlled the money. The board accepted it because the bank would otherwise freeze the company's operating accounts. Vivian surrendered every management role and lost access to company accounts, contracts, and personnel decisions. Natalie remained CEO in title during the initial review, but she was suspended from all financial authority. She could not approve payments, move deposits, hire advisors, or communicate with lenders without independent oversight. Grant's consulting agreement ended that afternoon. The restructuring firm opened protected accounts for client deposits and separated future event funds from general operating expenses. Back wages were paid before executive retainers, bonuses, or consulting fees. Every unpaid vendor received a written schedule showing the amount owed, the due date, and the source of repayment. The labels protected, standard, and low escalation risk disappeared from the system. From then on, invoices were ranked by contract date and legal terms, not by who management believed could be ignored. Renee insisted on a written non-retaliation policy before Simone or any other employee met with investigators. No one could be demoted, isolated, or dismissed for preserving records or answering questions truthfully. Simone did not receive a promotion as a reward for helping us. That would have turned one unfair system into another. An independent panel reviewed her production history, client evaluations, budgets, and years of managing events that senior executives later took credit for. 6 weeks after the gala, the panel appointed her interim chief operating officer. She accepted only after receiving authority to rebuild the payment process and publish clear reporting rules for vendors. Grant began cooperating once he understood that the messages, payments, and signature file tied him directly to the application. He provided additional emails showing that Vivian had approved the plan and Natalie had authorized the final submission. His cooperation did not erase his role. It only changed how the authorities evaluated it. Natalie called me twice during the first month. The first time, she asked whether I could stop the investigation. The second time, she asked whether I wanted to see her lose everything. I want the people who caused the damage to carry it, I told her. I do not want employees and vendors carrying it for you. Our divorce was finalized 7 months later. Ashford Ridge Trust retained the house because Natalie and I had never owned it. The prenuptial agreement excluded my interests in the family trusts, and her attorney acknowledged that she had received independent advice before signing it. I did not ask for her personal savings, jewelry, or future income. I asked for repayment of the losses tied to the forged loan, responsibility for the debt created in my name, and a permanent restriction against using my image or the West End Renewal Coalition in any personal campaign. Natalie also signed a public correction stating that she had no evidence I had threatened, harassed, or endangered her. The correction did not erase the broadcast, but it gave our donors something solid to evaluate. The organization that had paused its $200,000 commitment restored the full amount after reviewing counsel's findings, Natalie's public correction, and the independent audit summary. Whitmore Heritage survived, though it no longer operated under the unchecked control of the people who had treated it like a private shield. The company completed its scheduled events, paid its staff, and began settling vendor balances under outside supervision. Vivian resigned from the board. Natalie stepped down after the investigation concluded. Crescent Meridian never awarded the original $20 million contract. Instead, it approved a smaller, monitored agreement only after the company met new financial and vendor standards. Reporters waited outside Crescent Meridian headquarters, but I returned to West End without a press conference, a victory speech, or a photograph. Power had done its job by protecting the people who had not caused the harm. It did not need applause. 14 months after the gala, Renee and I opened the first office of the Open Ledger and Dignity Project inside a renovated building in West End. The space had once been a vacant insurance agency with stained ceiling tiles and windows painted shut. Our coalition repaired the roof, restored the brick, and replaced the dark glass with clear panes that faced the street. Renee chose the name. She said an open ledger meant more than honest accounting. It meant no one should be forced to carry a debt, accusation, or label created in secret by someone who assumed they would never challenge it. The project focused on 3 kinds of work. We helped people whose identities or finances had been misused inside marriages and family relationships. We gave small businesses access to contract reviews, payment records, and practical legal guidance before delayed invoices threatened their survival. We also trained companies to document conduct with facts instead of vague labels. A person had raised their voice or they had not. A person had made a threat or they had not. Words such as difficult, intimidating, and unsuitable could no longer stand alone as evidence. The first cases arrived quietly. A restaurant owner waiting 9 months for payment, an accountant whose identity had been used by someone close to her, and a transportation company delayed because management assumed it could not afford to fight. They needed records, time, and someone willing to act before the damage became a crisis. Renee handled the legal structure. I raised funds, met with partner organizations, and continued my work at West End Renewal Coalition. An independent committee of Crescent Meridian's board approved office space and administrative support through the company's community grant program, but I refused to place its logo above the project's name. People should not have to feel impressed before asking for help. Our first fundraising reception took place in the restored lobby on a cool Thursday evening. The room was full without feeling crowded. Local business owners stood beside attorneys, hotel managers, community organizers, and several vendors once listed as low escalation risk by Whitmore Heritage. Simone attended after work. She had completed her interim term and earned the permanent operations role through an independent board vote. She did not speak about the gala, neither did I. Some nights did not need to be relived to remain understood. Near the end of the reception, a server carrying a tray stepped backward to allow 2 guests through a narrow space. His hip touched the edge of a table. One glass tipped, struck another, and sent a small splash of red wine across the sleeve of my gray jacket. The server froze. He was 23, new to the catering company, and suddenly pale beneath the room's lights. "Mr. Ellison, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't see the table. I can pay for the cleaning." Conversations nearby softened as people noticed. For a second, I was back in Crown Hall with cold wine running down my collar and security moving toward me while strangers watched. The memory arrived without the old heat. It was only a memory now. I took a napkin from the table and pressed it against my sleeve. "You spilled some wine," I said. "That's all. No one needs to turn a mistake into a judgment about who you are." His shoulders lowered. He offered another apology, quieter this time, then returned to work after replacing the glass. The room returned to its conversations, and no one turned the accident into a judgment. I looked at the faint mark left on the fabric. The first stain had been placed there to show that I did not belong in a room. This one came from a crowded table and a man trying to do his job. It would disappear at the cleaner. A title had made people stand when Calvin spoke my name. Evidence had made them quiet when Renee opened her files. Neither one had created my worth. It had been there when they believed I had nothing, and it existed in every person who entered a room without power waiting behind them. If this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more. Which moment hit you hardest, and where are you watching from?